Welcome back to the YouTube channel. My name is Saman Habibi, your real estate agent for the Durham region. Today I'm here with a special guest, Clinton from Home Drafting Services. Clinton, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure being here.
So let's talk about garden suites. So a lot of people have been talking about this term garden suites, but as I learned today from you, that term is not the accurate term to use.
Yes.
And so I'll let you explain the term garden suite and ADUs, and we'll get into that.
Sure. So again, it's all about nuances and how things are legally written. So very similar to what we talked about with the idea of a duplex as opposed to a single family dwelling with an accessory. You still end up with two units either way, but it depends on how the legal documents are written for each of those bylaws. With garden suites, we've had garden suites for decades now. They've existed, but a lot of them are based on a temporal commissioning. So you're allowed to build a garden suite, but it was only allowed to remain as a garden suite for a certain amount of years. Most municipalities, it was around 10 years. The idea was you got granny, she's getting sick, she needs someone to live with, so we can build this structure so that she can live in it. Morbidly, you've only got 10 years, but you've got this time that you can actually have it, and then it needs to be decommissioned. So you'd still be able to keep the building, or you could demolition the building, but after that 10 years, you weren't allowed to have it as a separate unit. It could only be an accessory building at that point, like a garage or a shop or something like that.
Fair.
Whereas with what they've done with the bylaws lately is they've changed to the idea of an accessory dwelling unit. So it's no longer bound by any time. It can remain an accessory dwelling for as long as it's on the property.
Nice. Okay, that's good to know. So where can, in the Durham region, where can you build an ADU at the moment? So which municipalities have passed, which are reviewing, and which have stayed radio silence on it?
Sure. So it depends on what we're talking about ADUs. If we're talking about like the in-house apartment, which we've seen for numerous years now, pretty much any municipality will allow that, right?
Yeah.
The idea of this separate accessory building that allows for an accessory dwelling, a lot of municipalities are still working on their bylaws. They haven't actually implemented them yet. One of the biggest ones that has come forward has been Clarington, because just in December they actually had enacted this ADU bylaw that allows for the accessory building, or accessory unit in the house as well as in this separate building.
Right. Okay, so Clarington is good to go.
Yeah.
Do you know maybe you would know the ones that you've done, but do you know in general if this have people been doing these additional dwelling units, the third in the backyard? Like, are people doing that, or have a lot of applications gone forward, or
There's
not
been
many
there's
happening?
been a few. I mean, again, just December. We're only talking about about an 9 month period, right?
Yeah.
So there have been some that have come forward. The challenge is, I think that a lot of people aren't necessarily knowledgeable about what properties can meet that criteria,
Right.
or even that the bylaw is actually available in there. Because again, Oshawa for years has been kind of the go-to place for a lot of accessory apartments inside the house, and they're still working on producing this bylaw that allows for that third unit. So a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that they do, unless they're a real estate investor, someone who's up and up like yourself. There are municipalities that have it, but yeah, I think that the biggest thing is understanding the criteria that you have to meet for the property.
Yeah, so I guess we'll point out to the audience that for the purpose of this video, when we talk about ADUs, we're going to focus more on the third unit that we're going to be looking to build outside of the house. So so we spoke about Clarington has it. Oshawa is under review. So have you heard anything from Oshawa Municipality, the city of Oshawa, and who's in charge there? Are they talking about it? And same for Whitby, Ajax, Pickering.
Yeah, so I haven't heard a lot of news out of Whitby or Ajax or Pickering about it. I'm sure that usually most municipalities they're cautious about seeing how things get rolled out in other municipalities before they start rolling it out on their own. So definitely Clarington in the region has become sort of the guinea pig for what this is going to look like.
Yeah.
Oshawa's not far behind. Now, one of the advantages that we do have with Oshawa is there are certain members of staff that I know that were in Clarington who would have been involved in the development of this, who have now joined the Oshawa team. So there is that potential that same type of influence is going to be there. Right. So I expect that when we do see that bylaw roll out, it may be adapted a little bit for Oshawa, but it's probably very similar to what we see in Clarington.
Okay, that's good to know. And I know you've provided us with a map of Clarington.
Yes.
And we'll put this map up for our audience to see. And this map is essentially showing a view of Clarington, and there's 3 different colors here. So there's
Yes.
the green shaded area, there's the blue shaded area, and then there's the red shaded area.
Yes.
So can you quickly comment on these colors and what they mean?
For sure. So now we've talked about accessory dwelling units outside of the building. That's kind of our focus. But
Yeah.
when we look at this map, we have to be aware of what area we're in, because depending on the area that you're in will determine whether it can be an in-house or it can be an, I don't want to say outhouse, out accessory
Yeah,
building,
yeah.
or both, right?
Yeah.
So in the red area, it can be inside the existing dwelling unit. That's where you're allowed to put it. If you're in the blue area, you're kind of in the Oak Ridges moraine. You're in that sort of conservation belt at that
Yeah.
point. And in that area, you can either have one outside in a separate building or inside, as long as it predates, the building predates July 1st, 2017. I know that sounds like a really arbitrary number,
Yeah.
but for people like myself who deal a lot in the Ontario Building Code, there was a shift in the building code at that time.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the thermal performances and requirements for how a building is constructed changed at that time, which is
Okay.
probably why they picked that date.
Okay.
And then, of course, the green area is sort of like the green means go. As long as you're in that area and you can meet a lot of the other criteria and conservation isn't an issue,
Yeah.
then you can have the potential of having both in-house as well as in a separate building.
Okay, so the green area is where you will have little pushback and little red tape, and
Yeah.
essentially in the green area you can have potentially 3 units.
In the blue, yeah, green area,
In the green,
100%.
yeah.
100%, as long as it meets all the criteria
Yes.
for bylaws and conservation,
Yeah.
you can have 3 units on a property.
Awesome.
Blue area, it's sort of like Belleville with their
Yeah.
bylaws, where it's one or the other. You can have it out in a separate building,
Yeah.
or you can have it inside the house.
So 2 units max.
Two units max,
Yeah,
exactly.
perfect. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. And then so we talk about, okay, and then what about zoning? So in terms of zoning, are there any restrictions with any of the residential zoning properties? R1, R2, R3? Are there any restrictions on whether you can have the ADU, the third ADU?
So you're going to love this. So it's not based on whether it's residential.
Oh.
You can technically have this in these accessory dwellings in an agricultural zoning now. So I just
Okay,
did a
yeah.
property where we we essentially built a whole separate house
Yeah.
attached to the existing house.
Yeah.
The only difference, of course, as you've probably experienced this before, is to make that a separate unit, it has to have a cooking surface inside the kitchen.
Right.
So we didn't put a stove in. Now
Oh, I
that can be changed into its own separate unit. Even though the zoning is agricultural,
Yeah.
it meets all the criteria now to actually have that second unit in it. So there isn't so much of a restriction whether it's a residential or agricultural property. You can even have accessory dwelling units in detached buildings, semi-detached, or townhouses
Oh, nice.
if it's
Okay.
residential. It gets a little bit more limiting when you start getting into that blue zone,
Yeah.
because it has to be a detached dwelling for you to be able to do it. You can't have like row houses out in the Oak Ridges moraine and they'll allow that. But most of those houses up there are detached anyways, right?
Okay.
I can't really picture much that would be not detached.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you've been kind enough to provide us a drawing that you worked on for a client of yours in
yes.
Clarington.
Yes.
So we'll put this up for people to view as well. So this property, I'll just explain to people what we're looking at. So this property has a frontage of 53.6 feet, so very good frontage. And then it's an irregular shaped lot, but the depth is 217 feet. And at the front of the property is the existing property that was purchased. And it looks like a bungalow.
Yes.
Was the basement finished here or no?
It was, but
But it's going to be redone. Okay, and then the gray shaded area. That's the looks like the driveway.
Yes.
That is where you can have. Is that 1 car or 2 car driveway existing?
The existing driveway is a two-car
It's a
driveway.
2 car. Okay,
Yeah.
nice. So it's a two car driveway, and it goes into the property, and then there's space here for 4 additional parking spots at the back of the property, and then there's the third unit that's at the back of the property that's being built.
Yes.
So this is a fairly large property where it allows you to do that. It's kind of neat because you have the existing property. It has its own parking. It has its own backyard, and then there's an additional property at the back of the property that has its parking and it has its backyard space as well. So it works out really well here. Not many people are fortunate of having a lot this
Yes.
deep, more than anything else, because there are a lot of properties that are 50, 60 feet in frontage, but the depth is the important part. So looking at this, why don't we just jump into some of the accessory building ADU requirements. So we'll talk about the initial building, the setback, the lot coverage, the height restrictions, and parking. So I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah. So just as a little tidbit for all of your listeners out there, the property that we're talking about here is on Simpson Avenue in Bowmanville. So down that area, a lot of mature houses, a lot of bigger lots down that area. So it works out really well for what we did there. With this accessory building, we had to look at all the criteria that Clarington has come out with. For the most part, lot coverage is one of the bigger aspects. When we're talking about any type of accessory building, there's usually a lesser than requirement. So you either have this percentage or a certain amount of area that you're allowed to cover, or it has to be smaller than something else, right? There's always like a criteria for that. In this type of situation with accessory dwelling units as separate buildings, you're allowed to have 10% lot coverage, or whatever the maximum amount of lot coverage for accessory buildings is, and it has to be less than the principal residence building, right? So again, this property had a house that was 850 square feet on it, so our footprint couldn't be larger than the original building. It had to be less than 10%, which we totally met. And if this had been, let's say, a bigger property, let's say a couple of acres, in those type of situations, we would have never been able to do 10%, because usually on those bigger properties, you're only allowed like 5% lot coverage, right? So we would have had to go to the lesser of those requirements. But in most cases, either 10% or whatever the amount of accessory lot coverage you're allowed for that.
And lot coverage doesn't equate to square footage, right? Lot coverage is how much space the dwelling takes up of the lot. Because
yes, that's correct.
Square footage you can have up, down.
Yeah. So we're talking about footprint here when we're talking lot coverage.
Right.
That doesn't determine how many stories or anything. That's just the footprint that it's taking up on the property. So if you have a 1,000 square foot property, then 100 square feet is as big as you can build. But if you have 5,000 square feet for your property, then 500 square feet is how big you can build. In this type of situation, again, 53 by 217 or whatever it is, we're talking 10,000 square feet, right? So we had the potential of doing up to 1,000 square feet. However, we still had to be smaller than our principal residence. So we ended up like I said, the original residence was about 850, so we went to about, I think, 844 or something like that, just under it.
Nice. All right. So in terms of setbacks, what kind of setbacks are we dealing with?
Well, that's cool. So with your principal residence in the original building, there's certain criteria. Usually, about 6 meters at the front. You've got to usually maintain 7.5 or something at the back, and somewhere between 1.2 to 3, depending on what zoning you're in. Right. With the accessory dwelling units, you can have them in the front yard. So if the roles were reversed and the original building were near the back, we could have actually put this accessory dwelling in the front, as long as we meet the front yard setback and we meet the requirements of at least 1.8 meters from the sides and from the back. So there's the potential of being a lot closer to the back lot line with these accessory dwelling units than you can with your actual house.
Okay, awesome. So the existing property has to be, you said 6 meters?
Usually around 6 meters. Depends on the zoning, but it's usually about 6 meters.
Which is around 20 feet. And then the ADU in the back, 1.6 meters, you said?
1.8 from the back and from the sides.
So that's around 6 feet on sides.
Give or take.
And then, that's good to know. And then what about in terms of parking and green space for the dwellings?
Yeah, great question. So again, with this type of property, our lot coverage, complete lot coverage, was only allowed to be 40%. Now, in a lot of cases, when we're talking about lot coverage, they're talking about the building, right? And anything that's attached to it. So decks and stuff like that would usually fall under the category of lot coverage. In this application, because we have such a large driveway, we had to put all this extra parking in there. Because we have, some hardscape spaces, they take all of that into consideration when they were figuring out lot coverage. So originally, the client in this situation wanted to put in 5 parking spots, but we would have been over our maximum lot coverage between the original building, the parking, the walkways, and the building that we were adding there. We weren't allowed to put that 5th parking spot in. Now, we only needed 4, and the reason for that is the way the bylaw is written, you need 2 for the principal residence, and then 1 for every accessory. So when we added 1 unit, we needed 3, and then when we added the 3rd unit, we needed 4 parking spots for it.
Right. Okay. And then what about height restrictions?
Yeah. So height restrictions change depending on the zoning. So if you're in a rural area, you're actually allowed to go a little bit taller. I'm assuming because there's not as many houses around, right?
Right.
I think it's 6.25 meters you're allowed to reach. And with the buildings that are in town, like the one that we're looking at here, it was 5.25 meters.
Okay.
And all that information is actually on Clarington's website. They're very good about it. You can actually literally search ADU Clarington, and this information can come up.
Okay. Okay. Good stuff. And then in terms of green space, so for the 3rd unit in the backyard, is there minimum green space that you need to have dedicated for that property?
Again, it depends on the zoning. In a lot of cases, you're usually required to have at least 30% of your area as green space.
Yeah.
In this type of application, because we're not parking in the front yard, we're not concerned about taking up too much of the front yard space with that. If we had put all the parking in the front, that would have changed a lot of things. And we can talk about that, what that would have changed as far as parking is concerned and green space. But for the most part, usually 30% lot coverage is all you're required for green space.
Yeah.
And as you can see on that layout, like there's tons of room.
There's quite a bit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, so I know that so this is a larger property. But if, let's say someone didn't have this big of a property, and your depth was a lot smaller, right? So let's say you have at minimum, you have a 50-foot frontage, and then you have 100 feet in depth. You're around 5,000 square feet. Let's say your original building above ground, the principal residence portion is 800 to 900 square feet. Are you able to have this 3rd ADU in your backyard? Like, do those the example that I just gave you, would you be able to achieve?
Sure. Yeah. Now, I mean, there's different criterias and ways we can do that. I mean, the cool part is the way the bylaw was written, and this house that we just did, this ADU that we're doing on Simpson, is a great example of it, because we made the principal dwelling unit is only going to be 850 square feet because we have another unit in the basement.
Right.
But the way the bylaw is written, it's not based on the dwelling unit, it's based on the residential building. So that building has a floor area of almost 1,700 square feet because the basement is all habitable space.
Right.
So we were able to build something that was almost the same size as what was there. So that building, it's not like a slab on grade, it's not like a frost wall. We actually did it as a full basement, and we raised it to the ground. So it's actually a 4-bedroom house that's at the back, right? So it's double the size of what the actual principal unit is, and it's great because the way they wrote their bylaws for even the development charges, we've avoided development charges even though it is actually bigger than the dwelling unit that's principal, but it's not bigger than the actual principal building.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
So it makes a bit of a difference as far as that's concerned. But yeah, in that type of application, you can't be bigger than your principal building. So let's say the building was 1,000 square foot bungalow, so you've got 2,000 square feet of living space.
Yeah.
Technically, if you only were able to build a 500 square foot footprint, there's nothing stopping you, except for height restrictions, of building a 2-story building with maybe a basement in it, then getting 500 square feet on each floor. You've got a 1,500 square foot building back there.
Right.
So there's a potential to do that if you had to.
That's neat. What about development charges with these properties?
So again, you can take a look at what Clarington has on their website, but essentially, as long as you keep getting smaller than the principal building with each one, you're not paying development charges.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Now, again, brand new build might be a little bit different. Like if you were going to do this on a property that didn't have an existing house, you might still end up paying the school board development charges, but the overall municipal and regional fees you wouldn't be paying.
Okay, so you'll be paying a smaller portion.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So servicing the ADUs, water, sewer, storm, electrical, how does that work?
So again,
so for let's say the typical investor who already has this building up and they have the bungalow with the legal accessory apartment, so the 2 units, that's all up and running. Now they want to go ahead and add the 3rd. How would they access electricity, gas? water, so on. So.
Sure. So the first question is it a rural property or if it is an urban property? Because obviously rural properties, we're talking about not hooking up to sanitary and water supply. We're talking about a well and a septic being sufficient to support it, or putting in new wells and new septic.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's not something we've really had to deal with before, because in most cases it was only residential properties we were allowed to do these in. But in a residential property, like what we're talking about here, we start involving the region. So even though this is on a municipally governed road, it's still all the water and all the storm and all the sanitary is provided by the region of Durham. And the way the region of Durham is set up, you're not actually able to just set up a whole separate hookup on the same property.
Yeah.
So in this application, what we had to do was, it took a little bit of going backwards and tying into what was already there, but the water supply is actually coming from the original house. The water line to the house is being increased so that it can support the 2 units that are there plus the new unit. And then all of the storm and sanitary are all being hooked up just in front of the house and being connected to the road through the same connections.
Okay. All right. So they're essentially going to be using what's existing right now to the property, but there might be alterations in terms of the size of, I guess, the pipe that the water is coming through, like to bring in more.
So you know the water shutoff that's usually in your driveway or in your lot.
Yeah.
That little blue is kind of the dividing line between what the city what the region takes care of and what the homeowner has to take care of. So in this application, at that water box, the region back down to the road is going to be increasing the line to I think it's a 1-inch line.
Yeah.
And then from that water box into the house, it's the homeowner's responsibility to increase that line. Then that line will be big enough to support all 3 units.
Okay. So then, so we've talked about it coming from the water shutoff into the property.
Yes.
So now let's just think about this. So the basement's already finished. There's a tenant living there. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be a disruption to the lower unit in order to get water to the 3rd unit in the backyard, or is everything done outside of the property?
It depends obviously on where your water hookup is, where the meter's actually coming into the house, but I would anticipate there's going to be a little bit of disturbance because that all has to be hooked up. With the application of this one, the water meter happens to be very close to the corner of the house, so it makes it very easy. We're only disturbing that one corner of the house to be able to do this. And the other advantage that we have is all of our services are coming up through the driveway, and we have to redo the driveway anyways to create this parking in the back. So we're just ripping up the side of the house and putting in all of our supply there.
Okay. And then what about electrical?
Electrical is going to be brought in from the road. So it's actually being brought in just like a separate service would be for an accessory building. It's going to end up probably being on its own meter in that type of application. Again, as this starts to unfold into other municipalities, it'll depend on how they determine it. I mean, whether it's Viridian that's hooking it up, or whether it's Lexicon, or whether it's Oshawa PUC, they'll all have their own different hookups of how they want to do it. Some may want to go from the original building and then bring it over, sort of like you would with a garage. Some may allow you to bring it in right from the road as a separate, supply.
Okay, good stuff. And then from a building code perspective, when you're building the 3rd ADU, are you doing essentially a lot of the same things that you would do in a legal accessory apartment in your basement, in terms of the fire protection, the fire separation, the sprinklers, the egress, those type of things?
That's a great question. Now, because it is completely separate as a separate building, and it's a certain distance away from lot lines, most of the fire separations and fire protection that's required when you have 2 units in the same building are not required. You're basically building a whole separate house. Now, there are a lot of real estate investors I know that preemptively bought properties that had garages that they were planning on using for these. And I'm not going to say that they're not suitable. It just depends on each property and where that structure is created, right? So again, in Clarington, if you bought a house that had a separate garage that you're going to use as an ADU, and it's 1.2 meters off the property line, it may not be ideal because you're going to need a variance for that, because you're required to have it at least 1.8. If you have a garage that's slab on grade or something like that, you may run into potential issues with heating it and having to do frost protection on it and stuff like that. But if you're building it brand new, you're just meeting the requirements of what a standard house would be for that type of application.
Okay, good stuff. And then what about, and then heating and frost protection? You quickly touched on that.
Yeah. So again, it depends on what you're trying to build, what you're trying to accomplish. In this type of application, because we were building with a full foundation wall,
Yeah.
there wasn't really any concerns for frost protection.
Yeah.
Our footings were down 4 feet. Everything was great.
Yeah.
In an application where you're doing a frost wall, again, it shouldn't be a concern because your footing should be at least down 4 feet.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something like a monolithic slab, like a slab on grade type
Yeah.
foundation, as soon as you start doing that and you're heating a surface, there's the potential for that pad to crack because you have all the cold air from the winter and all the hot air from that space being heated. So
Yeah.
there's additional frost protection, whether it's putting insulation, foam board insulation on the outside of all those situations, elevating the floor so that it's not directly on the concrete pad. There's a lot of different things that may be required depending on, the application there to ensure that you're not going to have issues with your foundation.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, there's a lot of information there.
Oh,
there's
yes.
a lot of guidance that people need. So if someone wanted to do this and get started on a project like this, where can they start? How did they start this process with you?
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously they would contact me. They can reach me on my cell phone number, which, you've got. We can share that with everybody.
Yeah.
Or even by email.
Yeah.
Even on my website, there's a direct contact where people can, reach out to me that way. And then we can talk about the potential property that they have or the property that they have and see if it's, a winner.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I think this is going to be a game changer in terms of increasing rental income on a lot of properties to try and make up for the prices increasing and also cost of interest rates increasing. So if you have a property that's of a large size, you probably want to consider this. You want to talk to someone like Clinton about this to see if you can do it, because it would be a very good way for you to increase rents on your property and make your numbers look a bit better. And I know that there are few companies who have experience with this, and I think people would know, but like a company like Penguin Basements, I've heard that they're doing this, and they have it figured out in terms of what the cost would be to get this done. And I think some people have done interviews with them in the past, and you can check them out. They have experience with this; they would know how to get this project done. But yeah, anything else we should touch on?
Oh, there's so much that we could.
There's a lot to talk about it. Yeah, I know. You wanted a whole hour for this. Awesome. Well, Clinton, thank you for agreeing to do this with us and giving everyone a lot of the information that they've been asking for. Again, thank you for watching, guys. We appreciate you tuning in. If you can, please do us a favor and like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That would be greatly appreciated. And if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, and I can coordinate those questions with Clinton, and we can get some answers for you guys.
Peace.